Hello and welcome to Design Process 1. Today we're going to be looking at a very broad overview of visual language by exploring the elements and principles of design. While there are many books and many texts and many approaches to the elements and principles of design, the one that we'll be looking at, or the book that we'll be getting most of our information from, is Basic Visual Concepts and Principles for Artists, Architects and Designers. As you can see by that title, the elements and principles of design are very broad and cover lots of different subject areas. So this is what they look like when just written down. And let's work from left to right. If we look at our elements on the left, we can see that they're what we call form generators. So things that we use to create form, so lines, for example. Next, we have principles of visual organization, so how we arrange those forms. So, for example, we might align the planes next to each other and repeat them. We might call that repetition. And then lastly, on the right, we have what we call attributes. And attributes are how they look and how they feel. So things like texture, color, tone, size, stuff like that. But we'll be getting into it. So, what are elements and principles of design? So excuse my shaky camera work here, but I'm going to write some stuff out and do some drawing for you today so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, I'm fantastic at using my camera, so you can see I've cut off the title here because I'm a genius. But what I've said is elements and principles of design are. So, elements and principles of design are used to create an emotional response. So this is our role as the designer to create an emotional response in the viewer. Now remember, we've spoken before, and for those of you listening for the first time, in fashion we're fairly unique in the sense that we have a triadic conversation, triadic discourse, where we have to look at the viewer, the wearer, and us as the creative author generate those ideas. So let's take a look. This visual language works like any other language. Now, if we use the analogy of an alphabet, our elements work very much like our letters. And our principles work on how we arrange the letters. And our attributes they work like a font. So let me give you an example. Here are some letters. Okay, our basic building blocks. They don't really mean anything yet, but they're our elements. Aha, so we've put them in a specific order, like our principles. So now they're starting to mean something. Okay, and now we're changing the aesthetics of that order. Now, as you can see, when we just look at our elements and principles together, we get the basic message. And when we explore our attributes, we can get that message in a more meaningful or more exciting way. So while we'll just be discussing the elements and principles today to understand the basic building blocks, it's really important that we understand that attributes are as important as well. And that we create a predictable response. So when we use our elements and principles, we pretty much know a person who can read English knows that the word is cat. But when we look at our attributes, we pretty much can get an emotional response from that person. Yeah, that might be a response of thinking something's cute, or the memory that this looks a bit like a cat that they've had in the past, something like that. All right, let's jump into it. Now, this might take a bit of time, and it is fairly tricky to understand. But learning a new language is never easy at first, but once you start to practice it like any language, you will get the hang of it. So, what are elements? Okay, let's start with our most basic. Our first element is point. Now, if we join 2 points together, we get a line. Now if we join more than one line together, okay, we get a plane. Now if we draw several planes together, or join several planes together, I should say, we get volume. So working in a three-dimensional. We'll also call that form. Now if we think about how all of these are positioned, okay, and you can see I've expertly cut off the bottom of this frame here, but I'm just drawing a box. I'm drawing a little line in the box. And really positioning within an area is called space. So these are our elements pictorially shown, elements of design. Okay. What are some of the principles of design? Now, there are many, as you can see from our first slide. Now, I can make that diagram available to you if you would like me to. So there might be something that you want to comment on. I can put the link to that document, and then as well as a quick cheat sheet on definitions in the comment section. But I'm going to go through some of the principles for you so you get an idea of how to use them. Okay, so looking at our principles here. Let's start with top of the list. Okay, so we're going to explore asymmetry. And to do that, we have to understand symmetry. So when a shape, area, object can be divided equally with mirroring images, this is what's known as symmetry. Now it can be any axis, it doesn't matter. Now when this is unable to happen, this is called asymmetry. Now this might be used to create some imbalance in some aesthetic imbalance or an emotional imbalance. Okay, now this one's a little bit trickier. So closure relies on tricking the human eye. So you can see we're drawing this shape here. Now our eye will complete the shape. It will continue the line to complete the shape to make a circle. Now this is what's known as closure. Let me give an example on a garment here. So our eye will join all of the tops of those lines and makes it look like we're creating volume. So you can create the illusion of a solid shape without there being a solid shape. Oh, direction is one used a lot by designers, usually to shape the body or to take the eye around the body in a way to create an illusion. So it might be to elongate the body, it might be to slim the body, it might be to move the eye up and down the body to make the viewer see something specific. And we can see here that I've drawn the eye along this line from left to right. So I've used line to create this sense of direction. Well, I'm not very good at camera work, unfortunately, but let's see what we're talking about here. What we're looking at really here is transformation. So transformation is another principle of design, and it requires three things. You can see I'm drawing three objects here. So transformation requires three stages. So stage one, as you can see on the left, is the square. So that's what we might call the original state. You're right. It's a minimum of three, um, three, three states. It might be more, but we'll call this one the original, the new state, and in the middle, we call this the kind of middle or the transitory state. So it allows us to see, if we cover number 3, we can see really that number 1 and 2 belong together. If we cover number 1, we can see that number 2 and 3 belong together. And that gives us an idea that we can transform from one thing to the next. I mean, we may not physically transform, but we give the illusion that we're visually transforming. So if we move on from that, from something that's quite a rapid change to something that's a gradual change, gradation is a gradual change from one state to another. So we might think of that in terms of color. So maybe very, very light to very, very dark, but gradually. Or you can see here from small to big. Could be from rough to smooth. It could be from, bright to dark. It could be from, round to square. It could be from smooth to pointy. It could be a million different things. Our next principle we're going to explore is dominance. And dominance can be used in lots of different ways in fashion. It could be the dominance of the garment over the body. It could be the dominance of the garment within a space, for example. And we can see here the example that I've used just on paper is the domination of one thing over another. So the large kidney-shaped drawing over the little small circle. Now that is also to do with the direction of the top of that kidney. So you can see that the direction of the top of that kidney is kind of leaning right over the circle. So that's how we create that dominance. And that's how we create the tension. All right, the next one we're going to look at is repetition. So this is exactly as it sounds. It's repeating one thing over and over again. So this is important to note that when we look at a repetition, often the way we view it visually is as a whole. Because there are so many bits to it, we create a kind of our brain tricks us and creates all the same thing, and it makes it one thing. So it allows a kind of sense of calmness and kind of predictability. Now, similar to repetition is rhythm, but not the same. Now, rhythm creates a predictable pattern, but they're not all the same. And this gives us an interesting approach. So which one to use, which one not to use? Now I would suggest that when we're looking at something like repetition, if we want to cover a surface to make it all appear uniform, repetition is perfect. If we're wanting to take our eyes along a path, then rhythm is the way to go to create this predictable system. So when we look at principles, you can see I've given you a few examples there. Now there are a lot more to choose from, and I'm happy to do some more videos to go through to more principles for you. Now it's important to know that elements and principles don't exist on their own. They're always together, and you must kind of, in order to express a principle, you need an element. In order to express an element, you kind of need a principle. So what we're going to do now is break down those elements individually to see how they're expressed. And let's first start with your friend and mine, the most simple point. So point can just be that, a point. And our eyes will focus on that individual point. Or it could be, say, a radial point where our eyes move either in or out to a point. Now, if you think about where a radial point might go, it might be somewhere in a garment we want the eyes specifically to focus. So maybe on the waist, for example, and that would make the rest of the garment appear larger, therefore the waist smaller. So aside from a radial point, we might also have a focal point where we draw all of the attention to a specific point. Next in our use of point, we would have point to create direction. So we would move our eye along a series of points. Now this is exploring the principle of direction and the principle of closure to create a solid line. Now we're also employing the principle of closure here when we're looking at, and also repetition, when we're looking at employing point to kind of fill a void. So you can see there that we're creating that surface fill. Remember when we spoke about repetition, that's what we looked at. The idea that repetition, when you see it all together, it looks like one single thing. Okay, next is line. So this is as much a line, this kind of crazy curly line, it's just a different type of line. Absolutely not. So that is as much a line as the wiggly squiggly line. And as our example in the repetition, we're using line to fill a space, it creates a hole. We're using line here to take the eye. We're working on a two-dimensional space here on a page, but our eye to move along a certain track. Now this might be around the body, it could be along a page, it could be the way that we're wanting the viewer to see, it could be misdirection, which is often happens in clothing, that we use elements of the garments to change the way or to shape the way that the viewer sees the person inside the garment. We might also here use lines to connect points. As you can see from our previous examples, this is how they work to get those points to create a hole. That's using closure as well. All right. Now, we're moving to a bit more advanced stuff now, talking about plane. So plane is any enclosed 2D space. These are all planes. Now, this doesn't mean that a plane won't exist in 3 dimensions, but it might mean that it doesn't have volume to it. So you can see the example I'm using here, my excellent illustration skills, is really just a flat circular object that is wrapped around the neck of the body, for example. Exactly. 2D space. Now we move on to the big sister of plane, where we talk about volume. So we're moving out of the 2-dimensional into the 3-dimensional space. And there's a happy person living inside some volume there. And the space between the garment and the body is often called the body-space relationship. And this is used a lot by fashion designers to create a certain feeling in the wearer and a certain feeling in the viewer. So think about wearing, an enormous garment with lots of space around the body. You might feel very powerful because you're taking up lots of space in a room. Or you might feel very cozy because you've got this gap between you and everybody else. The other way to explore volume is also the absence of volume. Not having volume, removing volume allows us to play with the way that we explore volume in garments. This next one's very, very tricky. Space is difficult because it requires two things. It requires some kind of object or some kind of thing, and then it requires some kind of boundaries. So a place to put something. So I'm going to give you some examples. So the squares just represent a random boundary. It doesn't have to be a square, it can be anything. And we have two examples of us using point and space here. So space is where we place an object within a space. And it will definitely have an impact on how the object is visually communicated. So for example, this point here is the lonely point. Whereas this point here is in the spotlight. Now, that's how you communicate emotion with space. So how can you use the elements and principles of design? Well, the next thing I'm going to show you is a little quick exercise that you can use. Now, for those of you who are fashion designers or starting to be fashion designers, it might not necessarily seem like it applies to fashion design specifically. It definitely does, and we'll get onto that in later videos. But this is a really good exercise to get you away from thinking about garment types. So try this. So if you pick an element, could be point, could be line, could be plane, could be volume. Pick a principle, could be asymmetry, repetition, balance, harmony, and pick an emotion. It could be any emotion you want, very simple. So draw a box, doesn't have to be a box, but a box is an easy thing to draw. So draw a box, and in the box use your element and principle to communicate the emotion. Now this is visual language at its most basic. Let's check it out. So here you can see that I've got some boxes and some emotions. So the first one I'm using line and direction to communicate joy, and you can see I'm moving from the bottom left to the top right, and we're moving in an upward motion which could indicate joy. And the shape of the line, it's very curvaceous, which is very kind of positive and joyful. All right, what am I doing here? So we've got point and dominance to create fear. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, I have a single point, and then it's surrounded by lots and lots of other points. But there is a space between the many points and the single point. And that uses those large group of points all together create dominance over, yeah, that's right, Steve. Draw your arrows in so we know what you're talking about. So that large group of points dominates the single point, and that creates a sense of fear in that single point. Yes, yeah, I already said the upward arrow was positive. Okay, so we're looking at plane transformation to communicate excited. Okay, all right, maybe a little bit, maybe, okay, so our planes are getting more and more exuberant. Okay, until we have a very exuberant plane. Now, frankly, the distance between the second state and the first and the third state isn't necessary, is probably too much for this. So does it communicate excited? Yeah. Does it communicate excited well? Maybe not yet. All right, tricky one. Volume and closure to create power. Now, doing that in a three-dimensional way, in a two-dimensional space, is really hard. How can I do this? Okay, I'm using lots of lines here, lines and closure. We join all our points together. I haven't really used volume. Okay, forget that. Nope. Okay, let's try another one. All right, dodgy square time. Here we go. Okay, creating plane here. That gives the illusion of volume a little bit, I suppose. But where's the power? No, ruined it. You've added lines. Yes, volume, closure to create power. Good luck, friend. So this is what happens in the design process. Often you try things many, many times and you don't get them right. And that's okay. It's okay to not get things right. It's okay to fail the first few times because that's what design is. You know, if you're expecting, nope, didn't work either. If you're trying to do things perfectly the first time, then you haven't done enough experiments, right? Or you're not pushing yourself hard enough. Oh, geez. No, no, that was not going to work either. But what we're trying to do is to be incrementally better. No, not going to work. Oh yeah, what are we going to do with this one? Okay, we'll try it in a different way. Okay, maybe not so bad. Do we have volume? We definitely have closure. Okay, maybe a bit more volume. No, no, we don't have it yet. Try again. Okay, maybe some volume. No, no. Oh, is it going to work? Okay, yeah, volume and a bit of closure, but it just looks a bit bad. Because what we're not doing here is really taking advantage of closure. You know, we're pretty much just drawing some squares, and that's not helping anybody. So design is about a series of trial and error, and probably what's going to happen when you become a designer is you end up really creating, 10 times more than you need. Okay, suddenly we're getting a bit better here. This is more voluminous. Our closure is there. Okay, but where's the power? No, 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 because there's no volume here anymore. So too many lines. No, too many lines. It's not. It's better, but it's not great. Let's try again. Okay, so far I've drawn a coffee bean. Hmm. Yeah, our eye does. Yeah, our eye connects those to create the volume for sure. But where's the power? Yes, definitely it equals closure. Hmm. Nope. No, you didn't get it. Fail indeed. Nothing wrong with that. But it's about moving on. All right. So once you've figured out how to work into your squares, or maybe not, you failed 10 times like I did with that last one. So you take your boxes and you translate those boxes to a body. That one's the easiest one. Let's try that. Line, direction, and joy. Let's see how we can translate that onto a body. Here are some fancy pre-drawn bodies. Who would have thought all those years at art school? Okay, so we have a bit of line. Okay, now that's really creating a plane, not so much a line. Okay, that's a bit better for line. There we are. Okay, now we're talking. Now it is a bit more joyful, sure, but we actually do create volume when we do that. Okay, now we're talking. Less volume, less line though. Which one's the most successful here? Let's work back into this. Let's make this a bit more joyful. There we go. That's a bit more line. So our direction here is we're moving from, there we go. You're right. That's the most successful one in the middle. And yeah, the order here is correct. And what we're looking at here is direction moving from the bottom of the body, moving up, or from the, say, the shoulders in number one, moving out away from the shoulders. And it is the most positive. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily joyful yet, but it's the most positive. So incrementally, we're kind of trying to increase. And we use this term in fashion design or in design in general called evolution, not revolution, right? So that we're trying to gradually increase, not just jump from one thing to the next. So, well done with your camera work there, Steve. So we're going to push these a bit further. So we're going to try and explore extremes to see how far we could possibly push it. Here we go. All right, now notice I'm holding the pen in a slightly different way than I was holding it before, and that just really does change your perspective on drawing. Okay, now I'm exploring things like scale. This is an attribute. Using line. Okay, to create joy. Well, have we got it? Maybe. Are we there? Or does it create some kind of whirlwind around the body? But it's about extremes. So it's okay to explore extremes. It's okay to kind of push things beyond the bounds of something that's physically possible. It's very true. Drawing off the body in the initial process allows us to create or develop away from garments. You know, often in fashion design, we're kind of stuck in this loop where we're like, what kind of dress will I do? What kind of trousers will I do? And actually, when we're trying to explore visual language and develop something that has visual clarity, which is super important, we're trying to, if we kind of take away all those other distractions, such as the body and the type of garment, we can get visual clarity in our communication. Right. Well, this brings us to the end of our initial conversation. Thank you very much. Follow us on Instagram. Why not? And stay tuned for the next couple of videos.